All across America, strange noises are being heard through the night, defying explanation. This episode will take you through 3 chilling cases proving that our woods hide secrets nobody wants to acknowledge. I'm Josh Ninocchio. This is What Lurks Beneath. You won't want to miss this one. Around 2022, in the southern part of West Virginia, a man named Donnie, who lived in a very isolated area not far from the New River, was very fortunate to be living in an incredibly beautiful part of the country. It's very remote, surrounded by dense forests and steep mountains. He lived there all the time. He didn't necessarily always want to be out in nature. So on this evening, his friend Mark came over to his house, and it was a pretty normal night. They were watching UFC, they were playing Xbox, they had a few beers, just 2 friends hanging out, having a good time. Well, after a while, as the night went on, the UFC fights had ended and they'd been playing video games for hours. So they started to get a little restless. He suggests they go for a quick walk on a nearby trail, and it's not really too far, it's just a quick drive down the road and a little walk through the woods. And at this point, it's extremely late at night, and we're talking well past 1 in the morning. Most people would probably think twice about going for any sort of hike in the woods at that hour, but Donnie and Mark had grown up around the area, and so it wasn't a big deal to them at all. They weren't scared. It was a fairly known place. I mean, it was practically their backyard. And so they grab their jackets and they get a flashlight and they head out on the trail. And they get there, and as they're walking, they're just kind of just shooting the breeze and they're talking about the fight. It's just a narrow path that winds through the woods, and occasionally it would open up to give them glimpses of the surrounding mountains in the moonlight. After about 30 minutes of just walking slowly, which put them roughly halfway along the trail, they decided to stop. And they found this fallen log that made a perfect natural bench. And as they're sitting there just chattering away, they can't help but notice how incredible it is to be out here. I mean, the forest is alive with all the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, the frogs, everything. And during this interaction between them, something really strange happens. As they get up off the fallen log to continue their walk, the forest just suddenly goes completely silent. Not gradually, but kind of just all at once, like someone just smashed the mute button on the entire woods. I mean, 1 second there's sounds from the animals and the wind and everything like that, but the next, it's like they're in a vacuum. It was so quiet, it felt like a physical change. Kind of like atmospheric pressure changes before a storm. Now, this isn't lost on Donnie and Mark, though, because they both notice it immediately. And they actually stop talking mid-sentence and look at each other. And if this has ever happened to you, then you know that there's something almost primal about that moment when everything goes quiet. And every instinct in their bodies is suddenly on high alert. And so Donnie is standing there and his ears are just straining to listen to where the sounds went, because the silence is so intense that he can start to hear his own heartbeat, which is now starting to race because they're both sharing this uneasy feeling. And so he's talking to Mark and he's like, dude, we should go. I don't feel so hot about being out here. And before they could finish this such a short interaction, they both hear a voice, but it's coming from deeper in the woodline. And the strangest thing about it is it wasn't just a person calling them. It obviously wasn't an animal, but Donnie would later describe it as a mocking humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain, that it had a very weird electronic quality to it. But not like a recording or someone speaking through a device. In fact, the closest thing that Donnie compared it to was an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and the robotic voices. Kind of like something is trying its hardest to mimic human speech, but can't quite get it right. And even stranger is that the voice isn't saying anything that makes sense. It's making these weird sounds with the cadence and shape of human speech, but nothing really recognizable. And they both just have this mutual understanding that we need to leave now. They don't just turn and walk away. They both start running down the trail in the opposite direction from where this voice is coming from. They're sprinting, they're full out stumbling down the path because, there's roots and rocks there, and it's very dark, and they only have the one flashlight, and Donnie's carrying it. As you know, the beam is bouncing all over wildly. It's kind of disorienting because the way the lighting is, and it's just not as simple as they get back and they're fine. Things continue to get weirder. As a matter of fact, they didn't just run away from the voice. As they run, this voice is actually following them. No matter how far they run away from it, it always seems to maintain the same volume, as if it's keeping pace with them perfectly. And as Donnie begins to notice this horrifying revelation, he's in a complete state of panic, and he starts to run through all the possibilities of what this can be. Him and Mark were on the verge of tears. And in fact, there was only a handful of times in his life that Donnie had truly felt like he was in danger. This is beyond fear, right? This is fight or flight. And by this point, they're about 5 minutes from the exit of the trail when they hear something new. And it's a scream, but it isn't like the weird electronic voice they've been hearing. It's actually what he would describe as this primal, animalistic scream that just cuts through the night. Now, they have no idea who made it, but they're familiar enough with the sounds that it didn't sound like a regular bear or a mountain lion. Whatever it was had a humongous set of lungs. This was more than enough for Donnie and Mark to make it to the trail exit in record time, and they could see their car at the trailhead up ahead, and they don't slow down until they reach it. They both jump in, lock the doors, and they speed away. I mean, we're talking tires spinning so fast the gravel's just spraying. But when they finally get back to Donnie's house, they're still petrified. They go in, they lock every door, every window, and they don't dare go to sleep. They stay up until sunrise, and every little sound just jolts them, because they're just so on edge. They have no explanation for what they heard that night or what they experienced. They're one of thousands who have experienced very similar things in the wilderness, especially at nighttime. Unfortunately, whatever was out there that was trying to lure them into the woods and mimic a human voice and the scream, we'll never know what it was. It's unsolved. Just like Donnie and Mark, Ben, an eyewitness that was featured on the show These Woods Are Haunted, had an eerily similar experience. Take a listen.
The land where my uncle lives, I was back there. I knew it like the back of my hand. I was back there constantly. I was back there scouting, putting tree stands in, getting to know the lay of the land. And back there, I started finding different kind of strange things about this place. Even the first time that I walked through there were a bunch of they were stone circles. And I'm talking about, they weren't stones, they were big, kind of like boulders. Each one of them had one of them had 6, the rest of them had 5 big boulders in them. They had to take 2-3 big guys to be able to move these things. What I found out is, I guess this is what they used as markers, like for people's property. So when I found out that they had these, this old markers out there, I was like, yeah, maybe something happened back here. And I started reading about it, and a lot of stuff did happen up there during actually both of those wars. With Lake Erie right there were battles on Lake Erie. There were fights in those woods. There was all kinds of stuff that happened in the past up there. I started scouting that place in the summertime. So all the leaves and stuff were still on the trees, everything like that. Was walking back through there. Now, this is the first time that I started recognizing something kind of weird back there. It's something I never saw before. Never saw it since then. I was going down the trail, and I started seeing this, it looked like gelatin. It was completely clear. And it had there was almost like little black spots in it. Not all of them. Some of them had little black spots in it. First, I thought it might have been like frogs, when frogs put their, whenever they put their string of eggs out, it'll kind of look like that whenever it bunches up. But that's always in the water. There was no water here. And when I started looking at it, it definitely wasn't that. I don't know what it was. I didn't want to mess with it too much. It didn't have any smell, and it was right along the trails right in front of me. Now, whenever I would see this stuff, I don't know if it happened the very first time, but I know the second time I seen it that day, and every time after that, when I would start finding this gelatin stuff, this clear gelatin, it would get quiet in the woods. And it was a really eerie quiet. Now, because I remember, I'm talking about the summertime, there's birds, there's stuff flying around everywhere. And when you hear nothing in the woods, especially whenever everything was happening like that, usually there's a predator in the woods somewhere. Through the whole time I was there, I probably found that stuff good 20, 25 times. And every time I would get that real eerie silence whenever I would find it. It gives you a feeling on the back of your neck that you're not the only one in there. Like something else is in there that can mess with you. And it's not a good feeling in the woods, man. So now we're getting into the fall time. Clear stuff, I didn't see that for a long time after that. It wasn't until fall started, I started seeing it again. Same type of stuff happened. Now fast forward to that day I found that stuff too. I saw it going in, but it'll a little bit more of a roll later on. But I saw it going in, same silence. I didn't really think anything of it because it was, I've seen it a lot of times at that point. It was still weird, but I didn't know what it was. I go out to, now I'm with Brandon. Brandon wasn't with me all the time. He didn't, I took him hunting out there. He wasn't somebody who came out scouting with me all the time. He lived up in Erie. So I had him a spot. We built him a tree stand out there. And that's where we were going to put him that day. So I walked him over to his tree stand on that day. And then I walked over to mine. I got a climbing tree stand. It's a portable one. So it's loud. It's kind of tough to get up and down out of the tree. And so I get up in this tree. It was I'd say an hour into the hunt. I saw some movement over, there's a thicket over to my right. And I saw some movement over there and I thought it was a deer. And I looked over and it looked like deer legs. It really did. I thought I saw some deer legs. So I actually got my bow up. I'm looking. I don't see anything. I'm not seeing any movement again. But then I saw a little bit more movement or whatever. Now I'm seeing a movement a little higher up. And then comes out of the thicket. There's a tree. And then the thicket right here. And a guy comes out of the thicket. And he's standing there. At this point, he's behind a tree, okay? The way the tree was right catty-cornered to me. You're the thicket's right here. Here's the tree. Comes out, and he's behind this tree. He's just standing there behind this tree, not moving yet. So I put my bow away. I didn't want to have a weapon in my hand with a person walking through. So I put my bow away, but this guy's still standing there. Couldn't really see him. He's still in the thicket, basically. So I get my binoculars up, and I can see him through the binoculars. Right out in front of me was this big, wet area. It's all wet. Mud. There's mud everywhere. And I had looked at that beforehand because I wanted to see if there was any tracks or anything in it. It was right in front of my tree stand. I'm looking into the binoculars, and here he comes walking. Now, when I say he was walking, he wasn't walking. Okay, he had his arms straight down at his side like this, and his arms never moved. Okay, so it was straight down the side like this. His chest was popped out a little bit, and his head was kind of tucked back. He had a big bulbous nose like this, and he had a wig on with an old judge wig from I guess it would be the 1600s. I would imagine that would be from. But I could see him perfectly. So he has a shirt on. I could see that. Ruffles on it, like a pirate. Even his pants were like a beige color, yellow color. And then I could see his socks that were what is this thing? Tights almost. He'd pull it you know what I'm saying? He'd pull the tights up there. They're real tight. That was it. I couldn't see where his feet were, but that would have been down by where the leaf litter and all that was. But his legs didn't move either. His legs didn't move. His arms didn't move. This guy looked I'm not joking, man. It looked like a target going like this across the woods. I'm talking now. This guy he was only 25 yards ahead of me. It was not far, and I'm looking at him in my binoculars. I'm not talking about it's not like I could see through him, nothing like that. It looked like an actual person in the woods walking out in front of me, except that he wasn't walking. It was like he was floating across. And when he went out, so he come out from this tree over here by the thicket, come across, and now there was another tree. Now these trees aren't that big. They're not real big like redwood trees. Just big enough to cover them sideways. So he comes out, gets behind this other tree, and I'm waiting for him to come out the other side, looking at the binoculars. Nothing. He's not there anymore. Where is this guy at? And so at this point, 5 minutes goes by, which felt a lot longer. I end up calling Brandon. I told him, I told him like I just saw something. And I didn't even want to tell him what I saw on the radio because I knew he was going to start screwing with me. He's making fun of me like I seen a minotaur walking out of the woods because it was a person. I told him I saw a deer first. I told him what's going on. I said, hey, come over here. If you don't see it, I said, if you don't see any deer, come over here a little bit before dark. I wanted to show him. I said, I got to show you this over here. So he said, all right, he'll come over. I couldn't do anything else. Like, I just saw this thing that I couldn't believe. Like, he'd never come back out of that tree. I'm still totally freaked out because I don't know who wouldn't be. Freaked out enough that I started to get down out of that tree stand, that climbing tree stand, making a big racket. At that point, I just didn't care. I had to go down and see what was going on. And I fully intended this guy to be somewhere. Like, I didn't understand. My mind wasn't making any sense out of what I just saw. The only place he could have been was standing behind that tree still. There's no other place he could have went. There was no other trees in the whole area. It was just it's a clear opening, kind of. And sure as hell, I went down there, bottom tree, got down, looked, he ain't over there. But what I really wanted to see was that muddy area where I was at, where he was at, I knew that I had looked there before. No new deer tracks, no new tracks at all. And his tracks weren't there either. So that was another confirmation that I just saw something completely unbelievable. Because there's no way that anybody gets through there without leaving footprints there. It was muddy enough that you might even lose a shoe in there. It was muddy. I ended up getting back up in my tree. The rest of the day goes by. I didn't see nothing else happen. I didn't see any more deer or anything like that. It starts to get darker out, and he calls me up on the radio, and he says, hey man, I'm gonna come over now. I said, all right, good. So he gets down, I get down out of my stand. There was my uncle had built a real big tree. It was a tree house. I mean, it's in the middle of the woods. It's probably, 40 to 50 yards away from my tree stand where I was at. And he built it for his dad to go rifle hunting and put a heater in there and make it nice and warm and all that. And it had reflectors on it and all this other stuff on there. And it was close to me. I just used it. I'm using it as a landmark. I always did use it as a landmark. It's right in the middle of the property. I know exactly where I was at if I know where that is. So Brandon ends up coming over on the quad trail. Trails going all through there too. The quad trails that we walked down. We actually walked down a quad trail in order to get to our spots. I'm showing them where the guy come out of. We went over to the thicket. I said, this guy come out of here. Here's where he was at. He comes out and he walked over to this tree over here. We're talking. I'm showing him all this stuff, and once he actually came over and he started talking to me, I could tell he finally believed me. He's like, man, he definitely saw something. Because I wasn't going to be like it, and I'm not telling him to. Especially, I'm not going to get out and ruin an entire hunt just to do a joke on this guy if he do that. So he comes over and he finally knows that I'm being serious about it and showing all this stuff. Well, as I'm showing him, there's 3 roads. It's Fry Road. I think it's called Sherrod Hill. And then there's another one. I think it's another hill road. But it's a triangle, okay? And it goes all the way around his property. And actually it goes around a lot of other people's property too. It's a pretty decent size, land, but it's not huge. It would be different if it was in the summertime with all the leaves on, it gets harder in there to see, but this was in the middle of fall. It gets very cold up there quick. And the reason I say that is because we're standing under this pine tree talking about all this stuff. And so I'm ready to go get my tree stand to get out of there, to go, take off my tree stand off the tree and get out of there. And I couldn't find my tree stand. And I didn't understand we were, like I said, when I saw that guy, he was only 25 to 30 yards away somewhere in there. I couldn't find my tree stand at all. I couldn't find the tree that it was on, and I couldn't find the trail. So then we're start to go look for the big stand that's in the middle. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find this huge, it's the size of a garage, man. It's a building on top of 4 by or 8 by 8s or whatever they were. But it's up in the air. I'm talking big set of stairs, reflectors on it, 50 yards away from me. We could not find this house. That's when I started getting a little bit freaked out. I knew that we didn't go anywhere, and we were standing exactly where this guy come out in the thicket, except now It gets dark, and granted, when it gets dark in the woods, things do change. And if you start panicking in the woods at nighttime, you will get lost. You'll think that you're somewhere that you're really not. I get that. I wasn't stressed out like that, and on top of that, I knew that land like the back of my hand. I could go back there with my eyes closed. So what we ended up doing is we figured, like, if we could find a light, we're just going to walk to any light that we could find. And there's a ton of them. There's different houses, and all those houses in the back of their house, they all have lights that they put on, and a lot of them have lights that go on all night long. You know what I mean? They're not just motion detector lights. Or we figure, well, we just got to find a light, and then we'll walk out, we'll go through their backyard, and we'll get on one of those roads. Because if you get on any of those roads, you can just walk the road back, to my uncle's house. So that was our plan. But we couldn't find any lights. We should have been able to see his lights. Actually, couldn't find his. Couldn't see the neighbor's lights. Couldn't see his other neighbor's lights. If they're not right there, they just got to be a little further down. That's only, what are we going to do? We couldn't think of anything else. It was kind of like a situation, like, what do you do here? Everything was so different than it was. So we started walking a little bit. We kept the thicket to our right. That way we at least knew we were going in a straight line. Because you can get turned around in the woods at night too. Like, you could step over a log and start going the complete opposite direction. That's how people get lost in the woods if you don't have a compass, because you can't stay in a straight line. You end up going this way. But we kept that thicket with us to our right. When we were walking, I started seeing the goo again, and it was in front of us. And this was the first time that it wasn't actually on a trail in front of us. It was always on a trail. I mean, granted, we were walking on the trail, so I'm going to see it more on a trail. But I did look in the other place, never found it in the leaf litter. There was a lot of it this time. Like gelatin. It was like more firm gelatin. It was kind of like hard to push through with a stick. It was night, so it was quiet really already, but it was that real weird, eerie quiet, or that silence that we felt. And now that one, when that happened, that's when we heard the first scream coming out of the thicket. And it sounded like a person. It sounded like a person getting hurt, getting killed. It sounded like somebody that was in a lot of pain, to the point where we were going to run back into that thicket trying to find whoever it was. But that thicket's we knew that thicket's so thick that it's hard to even walk through. In fact, the only way to get back in through there is through game trails, and you got to get on your hands and knees. But that's where that scream came from. When we went further now, we didn't, after the first scream, we hear another one, and then we hear another one. So we start walking down a little bit, like down on the side of the thicket, trying to figure out where that's coming from. And then all of a sudden, we heard a loud scream, and it was close. It was the same one. It was the same screams, but I'm talking, it got through that thicket somehow. Whatever it was got through that thicket all the way up close to us. And it was far back. It was far back in the thicket the first time. But it sounded like a person. It sounded like a woman screaming. And it even sounded like she was screaming a word. And it didn't sound like help, but it sounded like she was screaming language. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't just there's a lot of animals in the woods, and I've seen a lot of videos too, like a lot of paranormal videos where filming something that's making a sound in the woods and it's screaming or whatever. But it's an animal. Like, I hear right away, that's a dying rabbit. You know what I mean? That's something getting attacked. It's a jackrabbit getting attacked. I mean, I hunt, so I hunt coyote, and I hunt everything. So, and they do sound like people. I don't blame people for not knowing that. Like, only reason I know that's because I've done it all my life. It's not like they're not trying to trick people when they do that. But this wasn't that, though. This wasn't that. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't an animal. It wasn't something dying. And for it to be able to get through that thicket so fast, I can't even think of anything that could do it. even if it was, let alone something hurt. I can't think of something that could do it that quick anyway. Freaked us out. So we started scooting. We started trying to get away a little bit, but we kind of caught ourselves. Right where we caught ourselves was on top of this hill, which was where we stopped. Like, hey, we can't start panicking here. But we were on top of this hill, man, and the hill shouldn't have been there. I don't really know how to explain it, but where we were standing at really shouldn't have been how the way it was. That's what really screwed us up. So standing on top of the hill, and the hill goes right down to the creek. Now, we know the creek's down there, and the creek was in the right spot. But that hill, I never, because it's very flat up there. Up by Edinburgh, up in Erie, up there where the Great Lakes are, it's very, very flat. It's like the ocean. Like if you come down my way, down like I live near Pittsburgh, it's really hilly. There's hills everywhere, and then further west in PA is the Appalachians. I mean, this is the Appalachians here too. But up there is all flat. That's what I looked at Brandon. I said, Brandon, man, I was like, what? I don't know where we're at. I really don't know where we're at. And he's like, what do you mean? Because like I told you, I brought him down there. Like he came down to hunt, but I brought him. Like he's following me. I said, Brandon, I do not know. I don't know where we're at. I said, I really don't. I said, I don't know which way to go from this point. That's when we started trying to get a plan together, and we started talking about the lights. But that's when I really started noticing like how where we were at anywhere in there, I started really thinking about it. Like we should have definitely been able to see these lights. As far as we walked, we should have definitely been on a road somewhere, because as far as we walked was far enough to get on any of those roads. We heard that scream, and that scream was in the thicket that on the other side of that should have been a big farm field with a farm, and you could see the lights. So you could see lights anywhere that you would have went in these places. You should be able to see lights. I said, I don't know where to go, man. The only thing that I could think of was to follow the creek back up, because I knew that at least that went up to an area where we should be able to see some kind of lights. That's what we did. We ended up going down by the bottom of that creek 10-15 minutes later at that point, and we heard another scream. This scream wasn't in the thicket though anymore, and it was further up to where I think would have been a field. So I kind of think that it was up by this field at that point, and that was the last time we heard it, and it was further away from us. So whatever it was went from inside the thicket, went through that thicket at us, did what they did, screamed at us right in the, like, closer to us. If it was a person or whatever, where it was at, the last time I heard it, it would have been able to see us over there. Like we would have been like eyesight of it. So I kind of think whatever it was definitely following us. It got closer the whole time until then. So that was a really eerie feeling. But anyway, so we get back up. We're following the creek, and the creek ends where it should have. And where that creek is, I told you, like, whenever you walk in, there's quad trails. There's and especially where that creek is, because where the creek is, that's where the quad trail goes over the creek, and it goes, off the one way, and then the other side goes on the other side of the creek, goes off the other way, and then that splits. So there's be 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, really, there'd be 5 different trails really meeting up right where that should have been. And I could not find any quad trails there, man. And that was crazy to me, because they should have been all through right where we were at in that little valley. Also, right where that would have been, should have been 50 yards away, should have been the big tree stand again, the big tree house. That would have been walking back towards it, which is kind of my plan. We're walking back all that way. Still no lights, nothing. Couldn't find that tree stand, couldn't find mine. On top of all that, I put, they're called owl eyes. Yeah, like OWL eyes. And you put them in the tree, and they're real, like if you shine a flashlight on them, you can see them real bright. They're in the tree. So you could, you mark your spot in the woods like that. I had those in the woods too. I had those kind of all through the woods, go to different spots. And I couldn't find any of those, because I was looking for those the whole time too. Because I'm figuring if I can find any owl eyes, I can get out. I mean, it's going to get me out. Couldn't find not one. Couldn't find any of them. We keep walking and walking. we end up coming back up around on this hillside, and we just start talking. I'm talking to him like, Brandon, man, I don't know what the next move is here. What you got any suggestions? I don't know what to do here. I really don't. I'm thinking honestly, man, like we might end up having to stay back here in the middle. I'm thinking how absurd it is because it's in the middle of 3 different roads. Like it's not that big of a part of land. But I'm thinking like, well, what am I going to do? I can't get out of the woods right now. So we might literally have to stay in these woods. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And Brandon's like, he's like, hey, Ben. He's pulling my shirt. He's like, look where we're at. We ended up standing. We were standing right under the same pine tree that we started from. I put my flash in it, looked and flashed it over to where my tree would have been. And there's my stand right there. I looked up, went over to my stand and flashed, and there's the big tree stand right there. Everything's right there. I shined over here. I saw my allies coming right over to my spot. It was 35 yards away from us whenever he seen that. We were standing up under that tree. My tree stand was 35 yards away. The other tree, the tree house was, like 80 yards away from where we were at. It was 50 yards away from my spot. We look over, and there's lights, and you could see all the lights again. I mean, you could see my uncle's lights real easy. You actually could see the lights that somebody had on in their kitchen. They were like eating dinner or whatever, that's neighbor. So you could actually even see that from where we were standing. So we could see all these lights again. And we walked right out from that point. We walked right out to to the back of his yard and got out. And the only thing I can think of, man, is it was some kind of time slip, something like that, where maybe like before all those houses were there, or before they had lights, or a long time ago, because the guy that we saw was in the like I said, he was dressed like in the maybe like late 1600s, early 1700s. It kind of all made sense with all the stuff that would have happened up there. I think that happened. I think 100% something like that actually happened. And that's what that story really was about. The ghost that I saw, like, whenever it was on the show. So they put all this on, they made an episode of all this on These Woods Are Haunted. And I understand they got to do it. They got to make it entertaining, like as quick as they can. And they kind of made it all about the ghost. But the thing is, it wasn't all about that, the ghost. They tried to make the ghost look scary and all that, but in my opinion, it's more eerie whenever you put all that together and you see that it all kind of does go together, if you think about it, if that's what happened.
Ben's account is also very similar to what Bonnie experienced in this next encounter. In 2006, a 10-year-old girl named Bonnie lived with her family in Spotsylvania, Virginia, a very rural and heavily forested area. Her family owned about 30 acres, and like a lot of kids who grew up in the countryside, Bonnie and her friends had a ton of freedom. They would leave their houses in the morning, and the parents would basically just say, "Be back before dark," and that was about it. There really wasn't any need for checking in. They didn't have cell phones either, so, the kids would just be outside exploring from sunrise to sunset. One summer day, Bonnie and her best friend were following some deer trails that went on through the woods when they stumbled upon a really cool creek. It wasn't very deep, but it was clear and clean, and so the girls made the decision to go and swim in it. It was hot, and it was like the perfect activity for the afternoon. And they're in there, they're splashing around, they're having fun, and before they left, they made a plan to come back the very next day with packed lunches so that way they can be there all day. So the following day, 1 in the afternoon comes and Bonnie and her friend set off, and they had their backpacks filled with food, and they were really excited to spend all day out there. As they made their way through to the creek, something seemed off that wasn't off the day before, and particularly, the path they were taking didn't look as familiar today. The girls thought they were following the same trail as yesterday, but they quickly realized they must have made a wrong turn somewhere because now they're lost. And instead of finding the creek, they emerged into this clearing with enormous, thick green ferns. And now they're really confused, but since they couldn't find the creek, they're like, you know what? This place is as good as any. It wasn't where they wanted to be, but it was still a nice spot. So they stopped to eat, and they had their lunch. And after they finished eating, they packed up their trash, and one of them suggested that they try again to find the creek. So they walked around, and Bonnie noticed that her friend seemed really on edge during this whole time. And, she kept looking around and, jumping at every little sound, and it only got worse as time passed. And as they continued walking around, things around them seemed to get darker. And you know how in summertime it doesn't get dark till way late, like 9, 10 p.m.? Well, this is like the afternoon, like 2 or 3 p.m. So there's no reason why it should be getting this dark. And after about an hour of searching after lunch, they still hadn't found the creek. This didn't make any sense, but they did come across something else very strange. Right there in the middle of the woods were these bathroom fixtures. A sink, a toilet, and a bathtub, all arranged like how they would be in a bathroom. But there were no walls, just these random fixtures sitting out in the open, covered in ivy. Now, they thought it was really weird and kind of funny, so, they took a moment to take it all in before moving on. And this wasn't frightening, right? Because people in rural areas use the woods to dump all sorts of old trash and appliances all the time. So maybe it was something like that. But after poking around a little bit, they were both tired and decided to head back home. So they tried looking for either the creek or another familiar landmark, but after about an hour, they still hadn't found anything they recognized. And that's when they realized they were completely lost. Now, Bonnie, having learned a little bit of navigation, suggested that they should follow the sun west. And she figured if they head west, well, they'd eventually hit a road or something that would lead them back to civilization. But her friend disagreed. She's like, heading west would take us further away from home. So, they argued for a little while, and they grew more frustrated with each other until they're like, you know what? We're just going to split up. Bonnie would go west, and her friend would go her own way. And they were going to see who made it home first. In hindsight, as you guys know, this was a terrible decision. But come on, these were 10-year-olds who didn't know any better. They were both convinced that they were right. 10 minutes later, after Bonnie split up, she heard something behind her. It was like footsteps, or someone or something was walking along. She initially thought it was her friend who had changed her mind and now decided to follow her. So she turns around, but when she looked, there was nobody there. And she's standing there for a moment, very confused, and she's listening. The footsteps resumed. Now, whatever it was matching her pace exactly. This went on for a significant amount of time, but she couldn't see whatever it was. She could only hear it. And the longer this went on, the more terrified she became. Now, she tried walking faster, but the footsteps would speed up too. And, she would try stopping suddenly, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was following her, but it would stop at the exact same moments she did. And after some time, she realized she was going in a circle because she now found herself back at those bizarre bathroom fixtures that she and her friend had found earlier. Being only 10, she had no idea what to do. So she sat down on a log and started crying. She's desperate, she's scared, and it was starting to get dark because now we're getting into the later part of the evening. The sun was setting, and she knew she needed to find her way out now, or she'd be stuck. Now, as she sits there and she's crying, she hears the footsteps again. But for the first time, now they're actually moving, and she isn't. Whatever has been following her all afternoon is now approaching her directly, and terrifyingly, the footsteps begin to accelerate. Whatever it is now running full tilt, crashing through the underbrush. She doesn't stick around to see what it was. She just turns and she takes off in the opposite direction, and she has no idea where she's even going. She just knows that she needs to get away from whatever is happening, right? With all the weird bathroom stuff and the footsteps, and, she's kind of stumbling and falling through the woods bit by bit, and the sounds, of course, are getting quieter. And now she can hear more of her own breathing and the sound of her own heart pounding away. And the further away she gets, she starts to hear something else. She hears this sound, it's really strange. She hears these big church bells, but not off in the distance like you'd expect. They sound really close and really loud, like there's a church just 300 yards away in that direction. And she can't tell if her mind is playing tricks on her or what the heck is going on, but for a moment, it gives her hope that she might be reaching civilization. So she pushes and runs harder. And now she's only a few steps further when the bells sound again. And now this time, Bonnie is able to pinpoint their direction. She's only a few steps ahead from the last time the bells went off, and she's ready to reorient her trajectory when she realizes that she can't. It seems impossible, but the bells seemed to be coming from everywhere. Well, somewhere above her. Now she takes a second to glance up in the sky, which is a dark pink now from the sunset, and between the openings in the canopy above her, she sees something that she can't explain. It's the darkest cloud she has ever seen in her life. It's almost hard to describe because it's like this patch of night hanging there in the sky with dark gray edges swirling around the outside. Now, this is beyond normal because she's so transfixed by it. She starts running again, but keeps her eyes on it. As she's running and looking at this thing, she almost starts to feel the energy drain out of her. She feels sick, almost like looking too long through a set of binoculars. Well, eventually, she has to look back at where she's going, and so she's glancing between the ground in front of her and this bizarre cloud, and that's when she hears the church bells again, and they're louder than ever, almost deafening. And she realizes that the sound of the bells is literally coming from the cloud, which at this point seems less like a cloud and more like some sort of hole ripped in the sky. Bonnie herself said the fear that overcame her was unmatched, even now as an adult. She takes off running harder than ever. The last bits of light are draining from her surroundings. She can't see where she's going. And suddenly, she collides with something hard, boom, and falls to the ground. She's a little disoriented and she reaches out to touch what she's run into, and it's a fence post. A wire fence stretches out in both directions as far as she can see in the gathering darkness, and she's thinking, I have to follow this fence. So she follows it, figuring it has to lead somewhere. She walks, she stumbles, she trips along. She's in complete panic, and she keeps looking over her shoulder to see if whatever has been chasing her is still there, but of course she can't see anything in the dark. After following the fence for roughly what probably was close to a mile, she now sees lights in the distance, and she could tell that it's a farmhouse. She realizes that she has to get there. It takes her a while, but she runs up to the door and she's knocking frantically, and an old man answers. And Bonnie, who is in complete hysterics and tears, tells the man that she's lost, she needs help getting home. The farmer's very kind, and he sees that she is very, not only visibly distressed, but she has bruises, she has cuts, she's very shaken, and she just flat out tells him everything she just went through. So he offers to drive her home, and as she climbs into his truck and they set off, she can see the clock in his truck, and she realizes that she had been lost in the woods for hours. And when she got home, she was shocked to discover that no one had been worried about her. Her parents hadn't even realized she was missing. They just figured she was spending more time in the woods than usual. After all, it turned out that her friend, the one she had split with in the woods, had found her way out about 30 or so minutes after they separated and gone straight home. Bonnie's experience out in the woods straight up sounds like it came from an X-Files episode, but like some of the other stories I've told you guys, she's not alone. In fact, there are hikers who have reported very similar things happen to them up in places like Mount Shasta and other national forests. Regardless of the truth behind her experience, it has changed her forever for that day, and she's very fearful about where she goes in the woods. And unfortunately, what happened? Why did it happen? It all remains a mystery. In the summer of 2015, a woman named Sandra was lying in bed at her husband's family cabin in northern Idaho. It was about 2 a.m, and she just couldn't sleep. Her husband was fast asleep next to her, and their 12-year-old daughter was sleeping in the next room. She had grown up in the rural woods of the Midwest, so she's very comfortable in nature and very familiar with all the noises. As an adult, she loved coming to this cabin in Idaho with her family. For her, it was kind of like returning to her roots. They'd already been coming out there for 20 years just to get a little peace and quiet. Now, the cabin itself wasn't all that isolated. It was actually part of a small community of other cabins and sat right at the edge of a large field that was surrounded by wilderness. There was a 4-foot barbed wire fence that would separate their property from the field, and it ran roughly about 20 or so feet from their porch. And in one corner of their property, right where the fence made a turn, was this old trash heap that had just been there forever with an abandoned camper, a wood pile, there were some metal drums, old barbed wire, broken glass, tires, just all kinds of junk, right? It was just too expensive to remove, so it was just left there over time. Well, on this night, She was just lying there trying to fall asleep. Her mind was just reeling from the events of the day. She decided that she was just going to get up and read, maybe have a glass of wine to try to relax. And so she got out of bed, she grabbed her Kindle, went out to the living room, she settled into a chair and started reading. And she hears this sound coming from outside, but it was coming from the field. And, she tilted her head and she's listening, and it kind of sounds like a coyote, which wasn't all that unusual. But there's something particularly off about this noise. It wasn't a normal coyote call. It actually sounded more like a coyote in distress. Well, a few seconds later, she got curious, and she set her Kindle down, and she walked over to the window. But she couldn't see much. She could see that it was a new moon that night, which means that there was basically no natural light. But even though she couldn't see anything, she could hear the sound more clearly now. She can make out that it's definitely a coyote, and it's definitely in distress. And the sound is definitely coming from the direction of that trash heap, which is in the corner of their property, right where the fence turns. And the more she listens, the more she realizes this coyote isn't just in distress, it's being attacked. It's fighting for its life. Immediately, she's thinking, oh my gosh, this poor coyote is like stuck in a trap or something. And that means if somebody set a trap this close to their cabin, her family's own dogs could get hurt. So she goes, she grabs a flashlight, she gets ready to step out onto the porch, and immediately remembers that the only shoes she has are her flip-flops. So if she has to go back to the junk pile in those, well, there's no way she's not cutting her foot wide open, because nobody wants stitches on the bottom of their foot. She slips on her flip-flops and steps out onto the porch, and there's still a chance that she might be able to see something. Long story short, she doesn't see anything. But the moment she steps outside, there's something strange. All the other sounds that she's used to hearing are gone, and the forest is deathly quiet. And now this is really weird, right? She starts to get the heebie-jeebies because the only thing she could hear now is the coyote fighting for its life. And she realizes that she can't even hear whatever is attacking this thing. All she can do is just listen to this pitiful coyote as it's whimpering and crying out there. It's clearly dying. She finds herself just frozen, listening to this horrible scene playing out, and she's not really sure what to do. She thinks about going back inside, but something is keeping her rooted there to the spot. Instead of feeling, overwhelming fear or anything like that, the sound is just making her so sad, and she has tears welling up in her eyes, and she can't take it. And then after another moment or so, the coyote's cries just suddenly cease. It's dead. And that's the first thing that came to her mind, that whatever it is finally died. But from that second on, all the normal forest sounds immediately resume. And she's thinking that this is really weird. I'm going to go back inside where it's safe. As she's thinking that, she hears something underneath all this that just really spooks her. It's this slow, rhythmic sound, and it's really close by. And then she starts to make out that it's footsteps, but they're on the other side of the fence. Now, she knows the difference between four-legged footsteps and two, right? Because she's grown up in the woods like a lot of you guys have. They're very easy to discern, especially at night when things are quieter. Something or someone is walking on two legs along the fence line, starting from the trash heap where the coyote has just been slaughtered. She immediately raises her flashlight in reaction, and she's looking in the direction, but for whatever reason, she can't see anything. Whatever is making those steps is staying just out of sight. Maybe it's hidden by the tall grass in the field, which at the time was about 4 feet at that time of year, or maybe it was invisible. She doesn't know, but even though her flashlight doesn't reveal anything, she can still hear it moving, step by step, slowly moving along the fence line. And now, whatever it is isn't trying to be stealthy either. It's just walking like it doesn't care that she might hear it. And keep in mind, this entire time, she's actively scanning it, where she can hear the sound, and it's not making any sense. Where the sound is coming from, where there should be a discernible physical source, there is none. As this is playing out in real time, she's trying to come up with all of these rational explanations. It has to be a person, right? This just doesn't make any sense. Someone else heard the coyote and came to investigate. But why can't she see anything? It's not just going down the fence line, it's actually coming closer to where she is. She's just getting more and more spooked by the second, and so she turns off her flashlight. She runs back into the cabin, she slams the door, she locks it, and she runs all the way to the bedroom, and she starts to violently shake her husband awake. And she tells him everything that happened, probably in a flurry of broken sentences. Her husband's like, don't bother me, I'm tired. He just goes back out. Realizing she's entirely on her own, she grabs a hatchet from the tool closet, sits up the rest of the night, and she's listening. Nothing happens. Weird. Well, the following morning, she insisted they go check the area by the trash heap. Her husband doesn't believe anything that she's tried to sell him. Her husband, of course, was like, see, honey, it was just in your head. You dreamt it. Don't worry about it. Sometimes being out here at night, things can play tricks on you. And they walk away, and she starts thinking that, maybe this was just all in my head. Maybe I'm just really need to go to sleep at night. I don't know. Well, interestingly, later that day, their 12-year-old daughter pulled Sandra aside, and she told her that she too had heard the coyote. And she was so terrified she couldn't even get out of bed to tell her mom. She just hid under the covers. In fact, it had scared her so badly that she refused to go down to the lake at the bottom of the property. Even later on, another visit to the cabin, when Sandra tried to take the family to the lake, which was just a couple minutes, in broad daylight, her daughter had a complete meltdown, shaking and crying, and just absolutely refused to go anywhere near that area of the woods. Unfortunately, what was really going on out there that night in the woods is anyone's guess. It remains a mystery. Years ago, a police officer had an experience that was equally terrifying in the woods and revealed what could have been a conspiracy to cover it up.
Well, the very first time I went down there, he wanted to take me to Joe Bald. So we go out, just stepping out of the vehicle. It was like stepping out into a vacuum. It was dead quiet. There was zero. There was no crickets. There was no frogs. There was nothing. And we'd seen deer and stuff like that on the way in, but as soon as we got there, it was just like dead. We saw eye shine that night. We were pretty sure that there was something watching us other than just the eye shine that we saw. And the first time when we first pulled in there, and this is a campsite that was a primitive campsite that's completely shut down. There's houses around there, but nothing major. But there is one of these white panel van. I know this sounds like a conspiracy thing, but I swear this is 100% true. There was a white panel van in there that had 24-hour service written on the side. Don't ask me what kind of 24-hour service, because it didn't say. It just said 24-hour service. And it stayed there the entire time we were there. And if we would go over to one side, it would move and kind of follow, not get too close to us, but move just close enough to where it could kind of keep us inside. And we went straight out there. We didn't have time to get any casting material, no nothing. We just wanted to get out there. So it's me, DA, and his son, Noah. We're walking around, and of course, me being the tracking guy, that was the first thing I wanted to do. Is I wanted to get a flashlight on the ground, start looking for tracks and things like that. The lake was down, so there was just river rocks everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there was nothing but like rocks like this, just everywhere. And I'm like, dang, you can find nothing around here. Well, just as I said that in my mind, DA said, look, and I turn and look, and there's a spot of mud, which in tracking was what we call a track trap. And it was about maybe 7 feet long by 3.5, 4 feet wide. I said, yep, I see it. That's where I'm headed. So we walked down there, and this is the weirdest substrate I've ever stepped on, because you could step on it in one spot and you would sink like a foot, and then take your next foot and put it down on right in front of your other foot, and it would be fine. I turn around and look, and DA is looking on the other side of me, and Noah's kind of up above us. And I looked and I shined my flashlight, and I said, no way. And I said, DA, and he said, what? I said, look at that. He's like, holy crap, that's a footprint. I didn't say, look at this footprint. I just left it open. I'm not going to get my hands, I'm not kidding. It was like every bit that long and probably about that wide. Beautiful, perfect. But we didn't have anything to cast it. So DA's like, all right, I'm going to come back to the hotel. We're going to pick you up in the morning. First thing in the morning, we're going to go back to Walmart. We're going to get some plaster. We're going to get back over here, and we're going to cast this thing. Sounds good. So we get back over there that morning at like 8 o'clock. Kid you not, there was a tire track driven through the middle of that track we found. And this was not like it was a bunch like anybody playing through there. And this was like literally maybe 150 feet off of the normal trail that people would drive through. This is downward. If the lake's up, this would have been underwater. So it's not like a place that people would normally drive. But you can see the tires went up and went through the track. You see where the tire pivoted and it backed out. So it's just like a point like this. So it just drove through that track and backed out, and that's it.
Speaking of conspiracy, one of the strangest alleged cover-ups is the Moss Mountain Massacre.
It's one of those little historical events that's been buried in the history books so deep that nobody even pays attention to it. To begin with, there was a man named Thomas Nuttall. Now, Thomas Nuttall was born and raised in England, and he had gone through an apprentice program to be a printer. But in his heart of hearts, he knew that was not what he wanted to be. So right around 1808, I think, maybe 1806, maybe 1809, somewhere in that period, he got on a ship, and he came across the ocean, and he landed in Philadelphia. Right away, he met a man named Benjamin Smith Barton, who was, at the time, one of the very first ecologists, zoologists. He was the professor of natural history at University of Pennsylvania. Very, very well-respected and well-known man in this very young country. Ben encouraged Thomas Nuttall in what was clearly his great love, which was going out and discovering new plant life, a new species. And he sent him out on an expedition in 1810. And he came back with all kinds of new species and cataloged them. And if you look through the history or through the annals of science, you're going to find a lot of creatures that have Nuttalli, Natali, in their Latin name, which is the Latinization of Nuttall. In fact, the Nuttall woodpecker is named after Thomas Nuttall. He did a lot. This is a man who crossed Kentucky, it would have been Virginia at the time, Kentucky, Virginia, and the Carolinas, and part of Tennessee by himself, collecting nothing but plant specimens and animals. By the time he was sent out on this other expedition, we're getting around 1811. He goes out and he comes back. He brought lots and lots of species back. He realizes my country that I come from and this country that I'm in, they're not getting along. And I could hang out here and accidentally get conscripted by the British, or I could go back to England and hang out there until this all blows over. Of course, the War of 1812 came and went. It was 1815 before he got back across the ocean. And right away, Barton Smith says, I need you to go out on another expedition. And this time I want you to go down the Ohio River. When you get to the Mississippi, I want you to go down the Mississippi River. When you get down there, I want you to go up the Arkansas River. Now, you're going to be out there for 5 or 6 years. So I want you to take a good, healthy crew of men. I want you to take horses. You're going to be on flatboats for the most part. Take horses, take plenty of supplies, collect all of the information, all of the specimens you can. So off he goes. Big crew of men on this big expedition. Now he's headed down the Ohio River, which is almost very, very heavily, we'll put it that way, very heavily populated by the French, by French settlers back in the day and their descendants at this point. England had just kind of gotten over the Napoleonic Wars, so he wasn't real fond of the French. And of course, we'd just gotten beat by the British in the War of 1812, so his men weren't really fond of him. So it wasn't the best situation. And that may have led to a lot to the ultimate discrediting of what I'm about to tell you. So they're headed down the Ohio River, and all Nuttall does is complain about these French people and how much he hates them. And meanwhile, not even realizing that half the men in his crew are of French descent. Then they get going down the Mississippi, and he's still complaining. And lo and behold, half of his crew comes down with malaria. They've all got malaria, so they're all throwing up. They're all running high fevers. They're all hallucinating. They're all not having a really good time at all. And in the meantime, they're supposed to be making friends with the natives. And some of those natives don't want to be made friends with. By the time they get down to the Arkansas River, though, they're mostly over their malaria. They still are kind of suffering from the after effects, but the worst of it is gone. They start up the Arkansas River. They are having some pretty decent encounters with many of the inhabitants of the area. They're starting to kind of get things going. They get to Beaver Dam Island, and they decide to camp there for the night. October 31st, 1819. 4 years into this expedition. So the way they did it is because they were never 100% sure if the next group of people they came across would be friendly or otherwise. They would always spread out their camp. Some of the men would camp in close by the fire. Some would camp around the edges. And that was the case that night. Nuttall happened to be one of the men camping out along the edges. But there were quite a few men in around the campfire. And I believe there were a couple fires. I don't think it was just one fire, because I believe this was a pretty good sized expedition. And they all fall asleep. And in the middle of the night, Nuttall is awakened by the sound of screaming and terror and fighting. And he opens his eyes, and it's bleary, and of course the fires have died down to very low, but just enough to cast great shadows. He can see his men being attacked by these really tall beings. And I'm not talking like, hey, this big tall guy picked on this little short guy. We're talking unnaturally tall beings. And they're incredibly strong because they're literally ripping his men limb from limb. And he can hear them screaming and crying and begging for mercy. And a man gets up and runs, and this thing chases him, and it grabs him and it twists his head off. And horrible. Sorry, I should have warned you. And it's in the shadows of these shadows created by the dying embers in the fire, and he can hear the men crying, and he's seeing blood and body parts, and it's just all so overwhelming that he passes out. And his last thought as he's passing out is, I'll never wake up again. Somehow the sun came up, and he opened his eyes, and he was still awake. Kind of tucked in, hidden underneath the underbrush is probably what saved him. And he crawls out into the middle of the camp, and it is a bloodbath. There are arms and legs and hands and fingers and toes and heads and torsos and guts and just everything everywhere. And everything's just soaked in blood. And he sits down, and he's just devastated, thinking he's the only survivor. And then he hears a groan. And he looks over, and he can see movement in the underbrush, and he's, am I about to be attacked? But it stands up, and it's one of his men. I'm not sure if it was him and 5 of his men, or if it was 5 altogether, counting him, survived. And that was it from the entire expedition. They managed to complete their expedition. They headed on up the Arkansas River to Colorado, which I believe is where it ended. And he wrote his reports. He covered that night and explained what happened. Over the decades, over the centuries, the experts have said, I love this, experts. Well, they have come to the conclusion that they were attacked by bears.
And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment below, bump in the night. So that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy storytelling like this, where we deep dive into cases of the mysterious and supernatural, what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button right now for more content just like this. As always, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.